We have a very exciting talk today. I'm going to be joined with Ann Ross, who is a Los Angeles wardrobe and prop stylist, and I will bring her on in a moment. I'm going to give a proper introduction to her. Before I do, I'll tell you a little bit about myself. My name is Monashee. For those of you who don't know me, I am a photo consultant. So that means that for photographers, it's really hard to see your own work. I look at your work objectively, and I build portfolios that really represent you and your brand message, as well as help you get to the place that you want to be with your photography, whether you're breaking in or not. So again, take a moment to introduce yourself. And also I have included, based on today's topic, I've included a self-styling checklist. So I know that some of you are not always in a position that your shoots that you can hire a stylist. So this checklist will hopefully help you in the process of, when you're in a pickle and you have to style your own shoots. So I am going to take a moment to introduce Ann, and then we will bring her on. Make sure you keep introducing yourself, ask questions as we go along, and I will pause every now and then to ask some of those questions, or I may wait until the end depending on how things go. Okay, so without further ado, okay, so this is Ann Ross. Ann Ross is a prop and wardrobe stylist based in Los Angeles, California. Print and advertising catalogs have been the focus of her 18 years experience in the field. Ann studied business and merchandising before her early career in window display and visual merchandising with such brands as Marshall Field's, Anthropologie, Gucci, Prada, and oh my goodness, I am so not a stylist, Salvatore Ferragamo. I hope that's right, which led seamlessly to her career as a stylist. Ann works with talented crews on projects that take her all over the country, and as the stylist, she collaborates with photographers, marketing executives, and creative directors to ensure each individual brand message is creatively communicated. Okay, so now I'm going to bring Ann on. Hopefully this won't be too clunky. Let's see, I'm going to do that. I'm back, and now I have to do this. And where is she? There, she's coming on. And I have to bring her in. Hold on. Technology, right? Oops. There we go. Hi, Ann.
Hi.
So nice to have you here.
Nice to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you for coming. And I have some questions prepared, and some people in the group are going to hopefully ask some questions as well. So first of all, I did a little bit of an intro, but maybe you can go ahead and tell the group a little bit about how you got into styling.
Well, basically, after I graduated college, I started a career doing window displays in Chicago, where I'm from. And I did that for several years, and I really enjoyed the idea of creating a whole idea, this whole concept from, the wardrobe to the propping behind.
So sorry. Okay? 1 second.
Yeah.
Sorry. Okay. That was my Facebook ringing. That's so odd. Okay. I'm so sorry. Go ahead.
No problem. So yeah, starting off in window displays and just creating a whole scene was really fun for me. And I did that for a while, and then realized that there's a whole career based on this. And that sort of seamlessly took my love of fashion and then just construction and creating a prop scene, and led seamlessly into creating photos.
That's so cool. It's like such a journey.
It was a little bit of a clunky progress, because I remember the first few meetings I had with photographers, I put together all my window displays, and I brought that book as a portfolio, like, I got this. And, they were impressed with some of the things I made, and some of the displays were awesome, but they weren't photo shoots, And then I realized, by trial and error, I have to start testing and get more photos in my book rather than window displays.
Mm-hmm. It's so funny how, I've seen this so much in this industry, and I'm sure it's in other industries as well, just how people start off in one direction and then they kind of meander their way to what they really are meant to be doing.
Right. Cool. And it's definitely a creative field. Both were, and the transition was pretty seamless, I think, because of that.
Yeah. Okay, so for those who are unfamiliar with what exactly a stylist does, maybe you could kind of walk us through, you don't have to go into too much detail, but just give us an idea of what you are responsible for on a photo shoot.
Well, I think it starts with the pre-production, working with the photographer and the client and whoever else is involved, talking about the idea and what the end goal is. Like, what do we want to achieve here? Whether it's a collaboration just for fun or you're working with the clients, it's all about communicating what you want to have happen. So once that is done, the stylist role is to go collect all the things necessary. And a good stylist will bring lots of options because you never know what's going to happen on set. You never know what the lighting's going to be like. You don't know if the models are going to be exactly how they described. So lots of options are always a good thing. So that's where it all begins, doing a lot of shopping, some research, and pulling together all these items that you'd bring to set. And then showing up to set and working with the models and the clients to make sure, usually you walk them through everything that you've brought and see if that's what they're thinking. Sometimes you'll send photos beforehand to make sure that you're all on the same page. And just start trying things on and seeing what works. And it just sort of evolves organically a lot of times.
Okay. And when you are hired for a job, who generally hires you? Is it the photographer, the agency, or the client, or producer? So who usually hires you?
It's kind of a combination. When I first started, it was usually photographers because as a stylist beginning, you would do a lot of testing and working with photographers to just get to know each other and collaborate with people who have a similar style and taste. And then as my career went on, it would be if a client really liked me, they may recommend that I come on the shoot, and I've never worked with a photographer before. It could be the producer recommends me for a job if the client is looking for a stylist, and it could be the client themselves. So it's sort of evolved to be across the board at this point.
Yeah, and it's different with every job, I'm sure. So I know some stylists do exclusively wardrobe, and some stylists do exclusively props. You do both props and wardrobe. Do you always do both, or do you sometimes do one or the other? And what are the pros and cons of that? Of like, why would a photographer prefer to have both together or separated? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, totally. You know what? It kind of stemmed from my beginnings doing window displays, where I would pull the fashion, and that would be, what we were primarily selling. Oftentimes, some stores I worked with, they sold home goods as well. So it was creating a whole scene, but then also having a mannequin dressed in the fashion. So it was this whole story together. So when I first started styling, I didn't want to choose one or the other. I liked them both. And it was kind of interesting because I was told early on, like, no, you have to pick one. And I didn't like that answer. Like, no, I'm not going to. And so I didn't, and it's actually worked out great. And I love doing both. And I work with a lot of stylists who do one or the other. And a lot of my assistants do one or the other. And slowly they'll start to say, you know what, I think I'd like to try doing props. I'm getting a little burnt out on only wardrobe. And so for me, it's fun because it keeps it fresh. You mix it up. Every job is different, whether you're dressing little kids, which is great, or you're designing a room set for, something else. It just keeps it really fresh. And there's good and bad to both. A lot of times what sort of happened is if I were doing a fashion shoot, they might say, you know what, there's just a couple props. We don't really want to bring in a prop stylist. Would you mind just bringing a chair or a table or something simple. And I laugh because a lot of times they say it's simple, but it can quickly evolve to this massive combination.
Totally.
So I think there's benefits in that regard, that you can have one person oversee the whole composition, which is helpful. But if it gets to be too big, I'll often say we should divide this up and have two stylists, because you don't want to have something get overseen because it's too much.
Yeah, totally. And yeah, there are times where they don't necessarily think it's going to be as big of a deal. And then the stylist ends up being overtaxed and can't, do either one really well. But I do know that a lot of photographers, especially when they're not like huge budget shoots, it is harder to find a stylist who does do both. So it's really beneficial that you have both of those skills. And did you say that you usually though are hired just for one or the other, and then you maybe add on?
It's usually one or the other.
Yeah.
But, it's hard to say because it depends on the scope. If it's a larger project, yes, it's one or the other.
Yeah.
But like you said, on the smaller things, it's like, maybe the focus is wardrobe, but we need a couple things in the background. Then, then it's both. Or it's props, but there's going to be a model, but so far out of focus, it's sort of like a prop as well, and then that's the combo.
Right.
So it really depends project to project.
Right. Yeah. Lisa Callback is here. She says, "Hi, ladies. Stylists are so valuable." She's a producer here in Vancouver, so she knows the value of what you do.
Thank you.
So let's see here. Okay, so I'm getting feedback. Are you guys getting feedback as I do this?
I'm not.
I can hear. Let me see if that's better. Okay. So sorry, gather myself here. Okay. So I know that you also do catalog shoots. So you do catalog advertising. Can you maybe talk about what the difference would be for when you're styling a catalog shoot as opposed to an advertising shoot?
What I noticed with catalog, and a lot of the catalogs I work on, I've had the pleasure of working with them for quite some time. So you start to understand what their brand is and who their core customer is. So with those two things, it's pretty important how you style it, and always keeping that in mind, what kind of things you would pull, how you would dress a room based on who that is and what month the catalog is, and what they're really pushing for that month. And for advertising, it's usually just a specific message or a specific scene. It's not necessarily as much about this long-term branding message as it is like a quick pull in the customer and grab their attention. So those are different. Also both I like them equally the same, but they definitely have different angles. Advertising is usually, there's a lot more people involved. There's usually a lot more money involved. So there's more opinions, and it can get not overwhelming, but there's definitely, it's not as relaxed sometimes because the crew doesn't necessarily have been working together as long either. They're all coming together for this one shoot, and there's a lot at stake. So it's important, and sometimes it gets a little more stressful.
And you are not necessarily with a catalog shoot. Correct me if I'm wrong. You're pulling mostly. You're going to be working with their existing wardrobe, like the client, a lot of times, right?
Right. Well, it depends too. If you're doing the wardrobe for a catalog that sells women's clothing, yes, you would work with the client. You usually go to their home office and work with the merchants and talk about how they want it styled. If you're doing the props for a women's or men's clothing catalog, that's sort of a different animal because it's more of a support role. You want to have things that add to the environment but don't take away from what is being sold. So that's an interesting shift in how you look at it and how it should be styled, so that everything in the background is really elevating what's for sale.
Right. Sorry, I turn my sound off sometimes when you're talking because I don't want to, so I am here like responding, but you can't hear me because the feedback, I think it's affecting that. But Lisa, tell me if that's any better, because I did shut something down. So hopefully that helped a little bit. And then, so in your opinion, and what is the importance, like, especially for a photographer, to understand the importance of having a stylist, not just on set, but also, you know, before the shoot, like doing all of the pulling and everything like that?
I think having a person who is dedicated to really thinking about just how the composition of everything is going to look is really important. I think everybody else has their role. The photographer should be focusing on, you know, how they want it to look and the lighting and the feel. And I think having the stylist is just that person who can focus on what colors, what options, and consider who the model is, what the scene is, what the background should be, what kind of elements, what kind of options we want to have, and just really consider all that. And then on set, really looking at that whole thing. I've worked with photographers, I mean, just it runs the gamut, but some of them are just so focused on the light, and I may not look at the light as much as I'm looking at how the whole composition feels, you know, or notice a chair in the background, like the chair looks weird, like, oh, I didn't even notice. I was looking at how the light falls on the floor behind the chair. So I think that that's pretty critical.
Yeah, and I you know, like, that's such an important point. In general, like, all of the people on set are looking at what their particular job is. You're looking at, you know, what somebody's wearing, and if they're, I mean, how many times have I seen, when there hasn't been a stylist on set, a shirt that's been, like, you know, flipped up at the bottom for half the shoot, and then you realize later that it's like either been wrinkly or flipped up. So having that extra the person who's designated, who knows what they're doing, to look at that and see it, is really, really important. And then same with hair and makeup, like the stray hairs and stuff,
Totally.
like monitoring.
Totally. And a lot of times hair and makeup people and I will laugh because, you know, I'll look at it quickly and it looks great, and like, but I'm moving on. I'm really focusing on everything else in the space, right? And they'll do the same, and, you know, usually it's cause for a laugh.
Yeah, totally. Okay, so Heidi says, hi, Anne.
Hi, Heidi.
So if for those of you who are just tuning in, this is Anne Ross. She is a Los Angeles wardrobe and prop stylist, and we're talking about bringing a shoot together with styling. If you have questions, please go ahead and ask them, or you can ask them at the end. There is a bit of a delay, so if you ask something and it doesn't get answered right away, we'll see it. It's just it might take a little bit more time. Okay, so just checking my questions because I want to make sure I ask the important things. Okay, yeah, so this is a good one because last week we talked about estimating, and well, we've had a few on estimating, but when a photographer or producer is building out their estimate, how is it determined? I know a lot of it is dialogue, but how do you determine how many days you're going to need to pull off a particular shoot?
Oh, a lot of that is trial and error from the early days of knowing, you know, where you live, what's involved. In LA, it's a totally different animal. If, you know, just driving from one place to the next can take half a day. So you have to consider what's being asked and where you're going to have to go to get it. So that it definitely, you know, I love being a part of the process. Sometimes you'll get an estimate like, here's what we have in the budget, and you just have to work with them to make that work. But it's great when you're asked ahead of time, here's what's involved, what do you think? And then you can sort of collaborate from there. But A lot of it is experience, and it's good to, when you're first starting out as a stylist, to test often so you can see how long does it take to pull 3 looks for 4 models, you know, and a few props in the background. But the more you do it, the more you just ask a lot of questions up front too, like just as many questions as you can think of for how many shots and what the expectation is, so that you have enough options, but not an overwhelming amount, because you can bring too many things and it overwhelms people. So it's a fine line.
When you're, you know, working with the client and the photographer, and I know there's that like wish list of these are the things that we really want to have on set, and these are the things that that, you know, we'd like to have, kind of thing. How do you manage, like, you know, if they're asking for a purple elephant and you know it's going to take you probably the whole time to find a purple elephant, how do you manage those expectations with the client, so that they, like, do you check in throughout the shoot if you're spending a lot of time looking for something that's not going to happen?
For sure. I think that's one of the most important things is communication, and just reassessing, like, what is the priority, because this is becoming difficult to find. But then I think it's just also about creative problem solving, and a good stylist can offer solutions like, okay, we can't find a purple elephant, but could we do a smaller scale one and maybe shoot a plate of it and strip it in later, or just come up with different solutions. You know, I found a gray one. Could you color correct it later? You know what I mean? So it's just about collaborating and communicating and just thinking of as many options as you can. Once you, and understanding what the end goal is, it kind of goes back. Like, if I clearly understand what you're trying to do, I could offer different solutions that maybe it's not even about that purple elephant. It could be something else, would be just as effective. So definitely communicating all along the way, and like, you know, this is how much this is costing. Is that still a priority, or should we shift, or do you want to, you know, find money elsewhere that you can put towards it?
Yeah, communication is such an important thing to kind of press upon. That is such a key. I remember when we talked earlier, you were talking about communication and how you know, when understanding, like when you're dialoguing with the client or the photographer in the beginning, and they say a certain word, what comes to mind for you is not necessarily what they intended. So having those, can you talk a little bit about that?
So critical. I was telling a story about a shoot I was on that the photographer was getting frustrated because she kept saying, I want some more texture. And I was doing wardrobe, and I had all these chunky sweaters, and like, I don't know how much more texture I can possibly get. It's very textured. And, you know, it just kept going on and on about how frustrating, like, you're not getting it. I want more texture. And finally I said, why don't you come over to the rack and point out some things that you feel have more texture than this? And this super cable knit sweater, you know, I mean, it is thick. And so she points to this plaid shirt, like, oh, so when you say texture, you're thinking pattern. Those are different things, and a huge distinction. So even when you're communicating clearly, it can be challenging. So it's just probably the number one most important element in having a shoot come together is just communicating. Mm-hmm. I can't stress it enough.
Mm-hmm. And, you know, and there's the before the shoot happens communication, and then the on-set communication. Can you talk a little bit about how on-set, how communication flow can really help, like who you're understanding, who you're talking to, or who you're listening to, sorry, like if kind of like the chain of command, like who do you answer to if you've got like 5 people coming to you asking you to do something different and contradictory?
Well, I think, again, that goes back to communication. A lot of my clients that I work with for a long time, one of the great benefits is that you sort of have this rhythm down, and you understand what the expectation is, and the communication becomes so much easier, and it doesn't need to be as thorough because you kind of understand, like, is it sort of similar to what we've been doing? Yes. Okay, great. And we can all just go on and do our thing, which is wonderful. When it's a new client or a new crew, I usually like to speak at the beginning, like, who would you like me to communicate with? Because a lot of time the photographer wants to know, like, what's happening. But if the photographer is on set and dialing in the lighting, a lot of times the client or the agency would come back and look at the wardrobe and start changing their mind or moving in a different direction. And it just becomes, I usually like to point out, like, should I be asking you questions, or do we want to bring the photographer in as well? How do we want this to work before we get going? Because it can easily go off the rails and people are just all saying stuff. And especially if you're on a location, someone's in the motorhome, someone's out on set, it can get crazy fast. So it's important to just make it clear, like, who, that chain of command, like, let's clarify who's calling the shots.
Yes, that's such a good thing to definitely understand. Okay, so okay, I kind of already covered that. Okay, so we're talking about specifically like how to really bring a shoot together with styling, because it is often there's just something missing. And can you talk a little bit about how you have done that with shoots, like kind of to give people an illustration of what that looks like?
Well, I think it kind of goes back to what each person is brought there to do. And, a photographer is dialing in just the light and how they want the focus. And I'm always looking at the whole composition and how everything works. And not only that, if you're working with models, I also like to see, like, if you put something on a model and you can tell they don't feel good, they have to be an exceptional actor to work past it. And a lot of these people really are, but sometimes you can just see, like, something's missing. What can I do to help make them feel good? Whether it be a space that they walk into that they're inspired by, or an outfit that they just feel like they look good. And I mean, it's just human nature. We all want to feel like what we're wearing or look like makes us represent the best we can be. So
that's such a good point. Like, it is really about like building confidence for the people that you're dressing, like making them go out and feel like comfortable. If there's something that's not fitting right, if something's like, I know when I wear something that like is tight in the wrong places, I'm like, no.
Yeah. I had that happen once. It was a while ago, but this guy came out and the client insisted that he wear this particular outfit, and it was pretty dorky, I have to say. It was a dorky outfit, but they were insistent, like, it has to be this. And I said, could we try something else? And just trying to be diplomatic without saying, like, this choice is pretty bad. And they said, no, it has to be this. So, okay. So he comes out and they keep asking me, like, what's wrong with him? Why is he looking like that? Like, to be honest, he doesn't like this outfit, and most people can get past it and just work through it. But sometimes if you just feel that bad, it comes through. And I said, see, it's you're not getting what you want from his facial expressions because he's just not happy. He's not comfortable. He feels weird. And they were then realized, like, oh, okay, go ahead and put on what you think would be like this, but make him feel a little bit better. And it's such a slight adjustment. Maybe it's just the cut of the pant, it's not the color or anything else that really affects it. And it's a whole new person. So it's really satisfying to see that difference. And I think that's something that a stylist is totally paying attention to while everything else is happening on the set. It's good to have that person who is just completely focused on those little details that at the end of the day make the whole thing come together.
Totally. And from a props angle, I've seen a lot of times, like, there's, especially right now, there is this movement towards like really real feeling within images. Like candid, like a really real life. So there's this fine balance when it comes to styling props, especially like for lifestyle kind of shoots. I'm thinking more specifically on, where it's like you want it to be realistic, but you also want it to be look good on camera.
Yeah.
So there's that. And then also, pulling things that the adding in and pulling out of elements to get that perfect feel. Is that something you can address at all?
Well, that's a really key point, that it happens a lot where you want it to look real. You want reality, photojournalism, but at the end of the day, you don't want reality, because reality is not pretty. So it's a very fine line and kind of a skill to take something that looks real, but like you said, is also photogenic and not, disturbingly real. And I think a lot of that is trial and error and just experience, knowing, like, how real do you want this kitchen to look? It feels like you're cooking, but not the reality of having, messes or dirty things. You still want the color palette to flow and the composition to flow. So it's a lot of playing, and a lot of times as the photographer is working with the light, I'm playing in there, working with the composition and trying things. And it's just a lot about just organically playing. And that goes back to why having so many options is great, to see, like, maybe a large canister is what you want in the background versus, a bowl of salad. So to have these options to play with until it feels pleasing, and then the models coming in feel inspired by the space as well.
So it gives them toys to play with, kind of, like something.
Right. And a lot of times they'll come in like, I don't know what to do. And I remember this one guy came on to set, and I had the whole thing where he was supposed to make a salad. And I said, just go ahead and chop something. But it wasn't set up quite right. And it was like the wrong knife to chop. It was like a bread knife to cut an onion. And he just all confused and like, okay, hold on. Let us have a second and make this right. Yeah. And when it is, then they walk in and it's natural what they're supposed to do. And they start doing it and everyone laughs and you get great images. So
yeah, it is. It's like so much about creating that environment. I mean, I think a really big thing that often that I've seen happen a lot is that, like, setting the set, getting it all set up, and then realizing there's just too much going on, like, especially from a visual perspective, when you're looking through the lens and you're like, it doesn't look compositionally right. So then you start, like, taking things out.
Yeah. I generally like to start with too much stuff, because you can always take it away. But and a lot of times, I mean, this is just my experience with different clients. If you start adding things, they're like, oh, no, let's leave it alone. If you start with a lot, you can start to pull layers away and still feel pleased with the composition. I mean, it largely depends on the project and the style. Like, people with different brands have very different styles and, require different things. So that's kind of a fun thing for a stylist too, to see, one brand might like tons of stuff in the background and others it's completely minimal. So it depends on who you're working with.
The other thing that I think is often overlooked, and you kind of touched on this with the salad, is like those living elements, those like plants and things that bring life to a set.
Oh, it's so critical. And to me, you can spot it so quickly. And I've been in the position where you had to bring in something fake. It's far enough in the background, but I think having something alive and organic just always makes the difference, and just makes it feel real. And I think that goes back to having a model. If you're working with talent as well, they come into the set, they can feel it, they can sense it, like, this feels really good, and that's another thing, like having fresh, depending how long your shoot is. If it goes too long, you're going to have to update all those things. It goes bad quickly. The fresh flowers and fresh food, you have to keep in mind that that's all looking good.
Now, can you talk a little bit about when you are, I don't know if you are in the position ever to work with talent's existing wardrobe. I know that happens on smaller budget shoots, when you pull in a stylist, you may not be doing that as much, but is that something you've ever had to do?
For sure. Definitely. Definitely on smaller budget shoots, that's usually the first thing, or will augment their wardrobe is what is often said. And in those cases, and really any cases when I'm working with models, I always like to get their information to communicate with them, because there's nothing worse than being told wrong sizes. And, you know, I can't blame models. You want to get booked for jobs, so you put down the sizes that look good. But to the stylist, I always tell models, I don't care what size you are. I need to know what size fits you so that we both look great, you know? So the first thing, going back to your first point about augmenting their wardrobe, it's really, again, about communicating, having a conversation. I've even gone to models' houses, you know, or they'll take pictures like, this is what I have. And that's super helpful, because then I can take that and work from there. And if the budget is really tight, just grab a few key pieces based on what they already have, just to offer a full collection and round out the color palette and pattern and texture and all that sort of thing, just to have plenty of options.
And do you find that, you know, in those instances where they are working with talent's wardrobe, do they, you know, specifically cast like for people that have really good wardrobe? I know I've been.
Well, believe me, I always
ask.
the producer, or if you're doing multiple people, like, try and cast them all the same size so that I can shop, you know, especially if you're on a tight budget. If you run a wide range of sizes, it's very difficult, because then, you know, the size 12 can't obviously wear the size 2 option. But if everyone's a size 6, you can all share clothes. You know what I mean?
That is such a good point. I love that.
If they would cast based on wardrobe, that would be great, but that's almost never the case. It's all, you know, about the talent. And so that runs the gamut as well. It could be people have tons of stuff, you know, and that's always exciting. Like, they'll bring suitcases worth, like, great. And I always tell them, like, you can never bring too much, is what I tell models. Like, don't worry about it, because sometimes they'll show up with a t-shirt like, well, I wasn't sure, so I just brought this. Like, we're largely depending on your wardrobe. Please bring as much as you can. But I've done it enough times. I know, like, I'll bring more than I think I should as well, because you never know what they bring. Or models will say, yeah, I'll bring some stuff. Like, what specific stuff are you bringing, so I know? But they're busy people too, and a lot of times you catch them, or they're working a different job. Like, I can't take pictures of what I'm bringing. I'll just bring some things. So you want to be sure you're covered, for sure. And
can you talk a little bit about the shopping process and how you manage your time when you're, you know that you only have like 2 days to shop, and however many.
I make a lot of lists, and just talking with the different talent. It depends what the project is, but if it's wardrobe, it's a lot of list making and thinking about how to most effectively use my time. Where can I go where there's a lot of places I can hit at once? Where can I get the bulk of the basics? You know, do I want to rent anything, or do I want to go to a place where I can return stuff we don't use? So it's a lot about just sort of mapping out the whole prep, the time you have to make it the most effective so you can get the most amount of things. It's usually a collection of having some basic pieces, but then you want some specialty pieces. So just planning out where you're going to source all that based on what the project is.
Yeah. And that's such a big part of it, is mapping out your shopping time, because it really is like, you don't want to be bouncing like you're in LA. You talked about earlier, you don't want to be, you know, driving all over the place and spending your whole day driving, when you can be more efficient with the places
exactly.
You go.
But I do have to say, most stylists, we are of a similar breed, because it's just something you can't turn off. And even if I've worked like a 10, 12-hour day, I'll still think like, well, I'm just not happy with the yellow blouses. I'm just going to try one more store. And it's just innate. I can't help it. I just can't stop thinking about it until I feel like I have the perfect collection of pieces.
Do you ever find that you have to go back, you know, for things like where you're like, I'm not sure if I have the budget for this, but I'm going to maybe revisit it later.
Yeah, well, not so much anymore, because at this point, I know if it's something returnable, I'm taking it when I'm there. If I'm not sure, just take it. And I say it so often, it's even translated to my family. My kids will say, Mom, just take it. Like, well, now it's not for a shoot. We don't need to take it for us. But yes, if it's something returnable and you're not sure, and same thing I tell the models, if you're not sure about something you're bringing, just bring it. It's better to have it and not need it than to wish you had gotten it and not have it.
That's another important thing, I think, to mention to photographers, is the whole idea of returnables and non-returnables and stuff. And that is one of the things about stylists that's such a benefit, is that stylists have these relationships with stores already, with rental houses, stores, and all of this. So when you know right away, well, this place doesn't allow returns, this place does, or all of that stuff. Whereas if you're trying to do it yourself, you have no idea where to go for anything. And yeah. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, I think that's a huge benefit of having a good stylist, is that they do have the relationships. They do know where to go. And a lot of times, if it's a smaller shoot, bringing a stylist on who may have a relationship with a rental house, which oftentimes that can get really expensive quickly. But if you're doing a period piece or something that requires a uniform or something specific, it's pretty handy to be able to go and to a rental house and say, it's really low budget, but we need a firefighter's uniform. And oftentimes they'll work with you because you have that relationship. Same thing with the store. If you're taking a little bit more than you're supposed to, or you didn't keep quite 20% or whatever their policy is, depending on your relationship, a lot of times they'll work around it and help you out. And I've had that happen over and over again, because it's beneficial for them too. You help each other out, because the stylist buys a lot over the years from that person. So when you're in a pinch, a lot of times they'll let it slide. So that's really helpful to have. And they also just, most stylists are always curious, finding new resources and stores and places to get things. So that's great. I often call, stylists in LA. We're always communicating, like, do you know where to find a living dandelion or whatever it may be? And it's just a network of resourceful people that are always looking for the new thing.
That's so good. That's great that there's like community and it's not all competitive. I'm sure there's a bit of that, but
yeah, there's definitely both. But for the most part, like, when you talk to another stylist, there's a moment of like, oh, you do what I do, that's competition. But then once that goes away, oh my gosh, there's so much to talk about.
Mm-hmm.
It's like any job. It's so specific that, no one else understands, what it's all about, except as fully and completely as someone else who's doing it,
And can you talk a little bit about, okay, we have a question from Ellis. What is most helpful for a photographer to provide to a stylist for test shoot? Casting, providing concepts versus co-developing concepts, budget, etc.
Wait, can you say that again? What is the most important thing for a photographer to provide a stylist?
Yeah, so when you're doing a test shoot, what's the most helpful thing for a photographer to provide to a stylist? And then he says casting, providing concepts versus co-developing concepts, budget.
I think for testing, it's kind of fun to co-develop the concept. And I still enjoy testing when I meet new photographers. I think it's really beneficial to do a test before, if you're considering working on large projects together. And it's a fun way to just work together without any pressure of a client liking or not liking what you're doing. You just get the opportunity to play. So for me, I think it's really beneficial to, if you have an idea what you want to do, and you bring a stylist on and like, what are your thoughts? And you sort of collaborate and let it grow from there.
Yeah, and I think it's a perfect opportunity to let everybody be their expert self,
Right.
like to bring to the table the thing that they are really, really good at in the best way possible. So I can definitely see that.
Definitely.
So I was going to ask you a little bit about when you are working with a color palette. Well, I mean, you're always working with a color palette, but how do you do that? Like, you know, through the communication at the beginning and then when you're shopping as well.
Well, again, it's a lot of communication at the beginning. The color palette, it's pretty crucial. I think a lot of it depends on who the talent is and what their coloring is. You know, you don't want to make the mistake of bringing a color that you know doesn't work on that skin tone, even if it's the brand colors. You know, you have to think about who is that talent, what is their complexion, their hair, and then I usually do a wide variety of colors within that spectrum. Like if your brand colors are yellow and blue, I know that soft colors are always more flattering on film. The really bright, intense colors, you have to have a very specific complexion to carry it off, and the lighting. So it's a collaborative effort. But oftentimes soft colors, nothing too strong of patterns, just things that are more flattering as far as color palette to make the most.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Well, just to make the most impressive image.
Yeah. And what tips would you give for, you know, for somebody who's pulling together a color palette that maybe isn't used to that?
Options. Definitely pull a lot of options. If you, I mean, it depends what you're starting on. If you're working with a client who has specific brand colors, that's a little bit different. You may have to do that specific color. Usually, even in that instance, though, they'll flex a little bit. If their color is bright red and that's not that flattering, you can do a softer, like a washed out red that would work well. So I think it's a matter of really taking a look at who you're casting, who the talent is. I always ask them, like, here's the palette, bring whatever you have, because oftentimes they have clothes that are flattering on them. And then just shopping for a wide variety of different options within that palette. And collaborating together, like this is what, you know, if you have the freedom to choose the palette, then working together so that when you show up with the options, it's not a surprise, like, oh, I thought we were doing oranges and blues and you brought yellows and greens.
Yeah.
Which is not fun. I've had that happen once.
Yikes. I think one of the other things as well, especially if you're not a seasoned stylist like you are, like you can work with more complex things, but when you're not used to it, I think, like, keep it simple. Keep it simple.
That is, I completely agree.
Yeah.
And I think that that's the most challenging thing for almost all creative people, to keep it simple. If you look in history, the best designs are simple. The best photographs are simple. You don't have to get overly complicated. And it's so fun. I think it's human nature, like, to just add another thing. But, you know, I often say it's my job to bring things, but it's also my job to know when to not add something. You know, like if people say, why aren't you putting one more thing in? Like, because it doesn't need it. It's going to go too far. So exercising restraint, I think, is just as important for a stylist as adding that extra piece.
It's like that. I see I'm getting feedback still. Oh, man. It's like that thing where you are, you know, getting dressed to go out, which I don't do very often because I've got kids and whatever, so I don't go out very often. But it's like that. You're getting dressed and you're like, oh, I'm going to wear earrings and I'm going to wear a necklace and I'm going to wear a bracelet. And you're like, wait a minute.
Yeah, what have I done? This looks ridiculous. Yeah. And it's about standing back and looking at it, you know, and sometimes if we overanalyze it, I like to walk away. Like, let's go look at something else. If we're on a set where there's multiple sets going on, oftentimes, like, I'll take the photographer, let's go look at what they're shooting, and we look at their composition and their lighting and everything else. And then you go back like, whoa, okay, fresh perspective. Sometimes walking away is the best thing you can do.
That's a great point. Okay, so let's do a few more questions, and then you know, we'll probably wrap up pretty quickly here. So those of you who are watching still, please go ahead and ask your questions now because there is a bit of a delay. And if you're watching the replay, please feel free to go ahead and ask your question, and we'll try and pop in later and answer any questions that haven't been addressed. Okay, so go ahead and ask your questions, guys. Okay, so, stylist assistant. So, you know, this is something that I think when you can't even fathom when you're at a certain point in your photography career, having a stylist is like such a big jump, but a stylist assistant, how can you explain that to photographers so they understand the value of that as well?
Oh, it's so valuable. But the stylist assistant is the person who, it's just your right-hand man. The stylist usually is on set the whole time, and that's the best place for that person to be. But in the meanwhile, there's a whole lot going on in the background. And depending if you have multiple talent, if you have some prop things going on, you need that assistant to be steaming the options. A lot of times if you show a client an option that's wrinkly, they'll just say, forget it, because it's hard to see past the fact that it doesn't look at the best it can look. That assistant can also be trying on options, because a lot of times, you know, you don't get a pre-production day where you get to do fittings on models. Usually, sometimes you do, which is great. But if you don't, you're waiting. Everything has to happen that morning of the shoot. So the assistant can take the first 5 looks that you like and try them on, take pictures of the talent, take pictures of them all together while you're starting to get the first shot rolling. And it's just really, really helpful and important. They're helping unload. It's usually a car full of stuff. And then the same thing at the end, it's sorting it all out so you can return it, because usually you bring twice as much stuff as what the budget is allowed. So you have to return a lot of it, and that all has to be sorted out properly. You know, usually the stores are very particular about having it go in the exact order that it appears on the receipt. And that's a huge task right there. If you've pulled from 10 stores, it's a lot of work. So that person is a critical role.
Yeah, it allows you to do your job better.
Yes.
And then, you know, going back to communication, when you are, you know, you're on set, they are with the talent, maybe in a totally different room. How does do they, I'm assuming a lot of them shop with you.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, you know, they know which wardrobe is for which model. They know a lot of that beforehand.
Right.
So,
and they may not be on, a lot of times there's not the budget to have them on the entire prep, but it's critical to have them at least the day before or a couple days before the shoot. I like to go through everything together. I like to have the assistant pack with me. And then as we're packing, I'll show, like, I'm thinking this with this. If that doesn't work, we can go to this. But then it all depends on how the model fits in all these options. So that's pretty critical.
Yeah. So then when you are on set, you know, we talked earlier about the communication aspect when you've got different cooks in the kitchen coming and giving direction. Now you've got a stylist assistant, and, you know, they have to understand that chain of command as well.
Yeah. And usually a stylist usually has a few really good assistants that they work with often. And for that reason, because then you can say, you know what, let's do the blue, and they'll know exactly what you mean by the blue as the other option for this. It's not working. Or you can, you know, some of my assistants, I can just look at them and we'll laugh, and they know what I mean by, you know, a certain look without having to say something on set if it's sensitive information, you know, about a fit or something. And they'll go back and change or fix it. And a lot of times changing requires re-steaming a whole outfit, you know, and it could be a lot of work involved too. If I'm on set, having that person there is really important to get that done.
Yeah. And I think you made such a great point about when you've got your people, you surround yourself with your people. Like, you've got your maybe a handful of stylist assistants that you work with on a regular basis, because you know, they know, and you know, and there's no like question. And I think in general, when a photographer or we all kind of build our crews around us that we take with us on jobs, because that communication, which is so key, is really, really, set in by having those people that you know how you communicate.
Yeah, and it just becomes a well-oiled machine that you just know. They know, when I'm doing a prop job, I recently had, my assistant's like, we know how much you love a bench, so I'll bet you want a bench in this scene. Like, oh, yes, you're right. Or whatever it is. They get to know your style and what you like, so they can make suggestions knowing what you'll probably be asking for. And that's really, really helpful to have. And especially if you're thinking about, if you're working on a catalog and there's many shots left in the day, you want to pace out what you have and what you're going to use and where you're going to use it. Having someone in the background helping you keep track of that is critical.
That's great. So, Anne, is there anything else that you think is really important to talk about when we're thinking about bringing a photo shoot together with styling? Like any other, maybe what are the 4 main, or 3, or however many, what are the main things that go into, in your opinion, bringing a shoot together with styling? Like, what are the main things to think about? Sorry, that was a very long-winded question.
Definitely communication. You definitely want to think about what it is you're trying to achieve, and just have as many conversations and conference calls and check-ins as you can. It's really, really important. As things change and evolve, it's good to let the stylist know, and vice versa. If something changes, a lot of times they think, well, it doesn't really affect the styling, but it may affect the way, the stylist thinks about prepping. You know what I mean? If you've decided on a different location, like, well, hold on, that changes everything. I think the production is critical. The organization of it is really critical. Just to know there's so many pieces, that are constantly in motion on a photo shoot. So if it's well produced, and even if it's just a few people, and even if you don't have a producer, but just having the pieces well organized is really important. I think it's important to surround yourself with people who are enthusiastic, who want to be there. There's nothing worse than trying to do something creative and have someone who's just negative or not into it, or it's too much, we don't want them to have to move. The people with the can-do attitude, it makes it really fun. And then I think oftentimes you get much better results, because it's like, sure, it's a little bit further, but let's see what's over there. Maybe it's a better spot, or whatever it is. Just trying is great, and having a good attitude, I think, is really important. And then I think that comes back to another key point, is just having teamwork, a good team that comes together. And that's really what I like about photo shoots, as opposed to larger commercials or television. I love the just how small the crew is, and you can really help each other and work as a really tight-knit crew, and just make unbelievable images together if everyone's working together and helping each other.
Yeah, it's really interesting when you think about, if you changed one aspect of the production, put in a different stylist, or put in your team is not all available and something changes, it can change the entire photo shoot and how it ends up.
Right.
Yeah. It's really that well-oiled machine that you were talking about.
Yep. And just having the right attitude, because a lot of times things happen on larger shoots, something happens behind the scenes and you may not be aware of it, but just, being empathetic and being flexible. Flexibility is hugely important, because it's just this moving thing, it all comes together and then it all comes apart, in the matter of a few days. And it's a pretty impressive project when you think of it in those terms. Like, we all come to the party, take out our stuff, make the thing, and then take it all down. It's amazing. So having empathy when a little thing goes wrong, I think is really important too.
That's a great point. So is there anything else that you would like to add? Anything else that you want to talk about before we end this? I don't have any more questions from the group. So yeah.
I think we've covered quite a lot about styling. I think it's a critical thing to have, and I think it's a great thing. I mean, it's nice to have a really creative team that comes together. It's an awesome career for sure.
Mm-hmm. It's so apparent that you love what you do, and I'm really like that's
good.
That's so important. And you've been doing it for so long, but you still really love it, and I think that's obviously that shows in how you approach your work.
Yeah, it's such a great opportunity. And I mean, just to come together with different crews and work with creative people and make something, it's really cool. It's a great career.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time to be here today. I'm going to leave Anne's website in the comments, so you can all visit her website and learn a little bit more about her. If you're in the Los Angeles area, then you know who to call. Thank you so much for being here, Anne. And if you're just watching the replay, please feel free to ask your questions, and also grab the self-styling cheat sheet, or not cheat sheet, checklist that I have in the comment section above. Okay,
awesome.
Thank you everybody for being here.
All right, have a good day.
You too. Bye.